So welcome everyone. My name is Gabrielle Claiborne and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am co-founder and CEO of Transformation Journeys Worldwide, an inclusion training and consulting firm with a transgender focus and non-binary focus. My company helps cutting-edge organizations position themselves to attract and retain the best talent, foster collaborative working environments, and drive innovation by creating fully trans and non-binary inclusive cultures. As a straight, white, single transgender woman, I bring to today's conversation the lived experiences of being a parent, a grandparent, an active member of my faith community, an author, TEDx speaker, an entrepreneur, and an LGBTQ activist who is over the age of 60. So today I am grateful to be moderating a panel of powerful, accomplished, and diverse women who will be discussing the importance of expanding the gender equity conversation to include all women. But I wanted to take just a moment and send a special thanks and shout out to Amy and Nancy Harrington of the Passionistas Project for providing a space for this timely conversation. You may be wondering, why do we even need to have this conversation? Well, in a different women's organization that I was a part of, this question was actually asked by several cisgender women after I, as a transgender woman, shared that I did not see myself in the lived experiences in a survey that they had put together to measure women's issues within the group. Well, when I heard this question, I have to confess, I was shocked. Just 6 months earlier, I had been invited to join this women's leadership group in what I thought was an attempt to ensure that the voices of all women, regardless of our diverse intersections, were represented at the table. But their inquiry brought up so many questions for me. Am I viewed as an outsider? Was I appointed to this group simply so that they could check a box? Do they really value my perspectives and contributions that I can bring to the group and the conversations? Well, unfortunately, this is often the experience of women who are lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex, gender nonconforming, queer, LGBTQ plus women. We are often perceived as interlopers with little legitimacy in the sisterhood. Our experiences of womanhood are frequently misunderstood, perceived as so different, and often seen as a choice instead of as an inherent part of who we are. But don't just take my word for it. Today, we are honored to have 4 accomplished women who will share their own stand what we can do as the sisterhood, the collective sisterhood, in ensuring that we're providing a seat at the table for all women. And with this, I wanted to give each of them a moment to introduce themselves, share a snapshot of their intersections, and a bit of their story and why they're passionate about today's conversation. And before we get into the panel conversation, we wanted to just give you a little clarity on how we're presenting today. One of our panelists, Jamie Bergeron, which you're going to hear from in a minute, their brother, correct, Jamie? Their brother's actually getting married today, so we're celebrating along with Jamie and our finest. So that's why we're dressed to the nines here. So great to celebrate with you, Jamie. So Jamie, meeting you a couple of years ago and following you and just watching how you show up, continue to show up. I love just all the things that you're doing and advocating for so many marginalized communities. Take a moment and introduce yourself and share a little bit of your story if you could.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you also to the other panelists for joining this conversation. I'm so thrilled to be here. A little bit about me. I live in Boston, Massachusetts. I am a queer, cisgender woman. I am Hispanic and French and Italian by nationality, and I have white skin and show up with white privilege everywhere I walk through the world. I am a queer spawn, which means that I have LGBT parents. I have 2 lesbian moms. One of of which is gender nonconforming. And because of my experience growing up in a queer family, because of being a queer cis woman myself and being part of the broader LGBT community my whole life, I have constantly had to advocate for myself, my family, and all the people that I love. And that has allowed me to also learn the skills that I've needed to advocate for other communities that I'm not a part of. And so I use those skills and I practice that every single day because I know how important it is for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. Tori, I know that you and I have shown up in similar circles over the last couple of years in our advocacy work and just showing up on behalf of the trans community. I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your personal story.
So thank you very much, Gabrielle, and thank you to everyone. Congratulations again to your brother. My name is Tori Cooper. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And by day, I am the Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative. By night, on weekends, early in the mornings, sometimes during my lunch break, I'm a health and equity consultant, which means that I fight to make sure that folks who have the least in society have their voices heard and represented everywhere in policy, in workplace development, in healthcare systems, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Tori, and thank you for your visibility and how you show up on behalf of the community. This next panelist I just recently met, and I'm just amazed at all the wonderful things that she is plugged into. And so I want to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and share a little bit of her story. Jessie, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jessie Jacobson, she, her. I identify as a trans woman, and I transitioned in 2001, so I'm about to turn 20 in one sense, and about to turn 65 and become a senior citizen in another, but I made it, so that's a good thing. In 2001, I decided to go back to school and I got my degree and became a marriage and family therapist. And I was the first trans MFT at what was then the LA Gay and Lesbian Center and later became the LGBT Center. From that, I branched out into lecturing about trans issues in psychology. And I also ended up teaching at my alma mater, which was a really interesting experience because I taught human sexuality, and probably going to be doing that again soon at Antioch University, Los Angeles. I was also on the board of we created their specialization called the LGBT plus specialization at Antioch, which is the only one of its kind at that time in the country, and still one of very few. And I'm also currently on the board of something that really excites me. It's counseling services called Colors. And Colors provides free therapy, free psychotherapy for LGBT plus youth 25 and under. So that's a really, really exciting thing to be involved in. And hopefully you'll all check it out. It's in the Los Angeles area, but currently, like most people, they're doing sessions via Zoom and all that. And I'm pretty much as white as you can be, but I'm half Jewish, and a lot of other things that some of them I don't even know. But I'm so honored to be here, and I'm really excited about this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for your visibility and all the different ways that you're showing up on behalf of the women's movement and as well as the LGBTQ community. Thank you. This next person I wanted to introduce is a friend and colleague of mine. She was actually the co-author of this conversation around expanding gender equity to include all women. My good friend, Sandy Mollett, she and I have worked on multiple presentations, both on behalf of LGBTQ equity and equality, as well as women's equity and equality. And I'm so grateful that she is bringing her perspective to today's conversation. I'm gonna let her share a few minutes about how she shows up today. So Sandy, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you to all the panelists and the Passionistas. I'm so honored to be here. Well, my pronouns are she, her. I am a white, cisgender lesbian. I'm over 50. I'm married. I don't have any children. I am a community activist and advocate and ally. I typically present more on the masculine side, but typically pretty gender neutral. And, you know, I'm a corporate executive. I'm a consultant, and I'm currently the chief operating officer for a company called True Diversity, who is focused on helping historically excluded and underrepresented job seekers in tech find really great companies that are sincere and authentic about culture and finding them and helping them with those tech jobs. So really honored to be here, and thank you again to all of the panelists and Gabrielle.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for showing up the way you do. You know, I hope that our audience can tell that just by hearing these introductions from these four amazing ladies, just the width, breadth, and depth of how our intersections show up. So I wanted to come back to Jamie and give Jamie an opportunity to share a little bit about, you know, what has been your workplace experience as a queer Latina, queer spawn, a woman in the workplace. You want to share a little bit about, you know, what your experience has been with all of those identities figured into it?
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle.
Okay,
I
go ahead.
You cut in a little bit for me, so but I think I got that. So my background is in higher education, diversity and inclusion work. So I worked for 10 years at colleges and universities across the Northeast, 5 or 6 different campuses. And I currently work in the corporate space at EY or Ernst & Young, also doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I have to say one of the biggest personal experiences that I have is an experience of invisibility. All of the different parts of who I am are not visible by looking at me. I have to say and clarify for people everything about me. And that's really different for some other folks whose identities allow certain parts of them to be read right away. And that's not to say that their histories or their experiences or their stories are fully encompassed just upon looking at them, certainly not. But for myself, I find myself clarifying and re-explaining and helping people understand and get working with people's confusion really, because of how I show up with a very feminine presentation. People are often really confused by myself having a queer identity. I'm a person who dates mostly women, transgender people, and non-binary folks, and I often see on their faces a look of confusion when they see who I'm dating or who I'm with, or I'm talking about my experiences, or just growing up with queer parents and in the queer community. I one time in a job interview for an LGBT center was asked a question, well, why would you as an ally want this job? And I had not said in the interview that I am queer or a part of the LGBT community or an ally. I think I assumed that because I was applying for the role, they would assume that I was part of the community, and they didn't. They assumed I was an ally. And so that was a real turning point for me, where I learned at that point I must say who I am right when I meet people so that they know. And the same goes for my ethnicity. You know, growing up with one parent who I'm biologically related to, one parent who's not, and having a donor history as part of my conception, my ethnicity is an interesting story, right? And because I show up with white skin, that doesn't tell the whole story of how I experience my own culture and what's important to me about where I come from. I also have a bit of racial ambiguity. It sort of depends who I'm with. If I'm with a bunch of Italian friends, they think I'm Italian. If I'm with all of my Latinx and Black friends, people think I'm Latina, and that's not a question. So that experience of invisibility about who I am is really important to me. because it's important for me to let other people know where I stand and what points of knowledge I come from. So that's one piece. And then the last piece I'll just add is that I think also as a feminine person, just as a woman in general, I'm often assumed to not have the opinions I have, not have the confidence that I have, and not have the power that I've really had to work hard to claim in my life in a professional space. And so I find myself constantly sort of beating against the door of patriarchy, beating against the door of male dominated spaces, and needing to say, no, this is who I am, and these are my credentials, and this is what I am bringing to the table. I am the expert in the room in this scenario. And, as all of you ladies, I'm sure, can understand, it can get very tiring. Sometimes I just want to show up and have everyone believe I belong there. So that's another experience I would say, being a queer woman. I pay a lot of attention to how I feel in those spaces and how much energy it takes me to feel like I belong.
Jamie, I loved you're highlighting. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me okay, right? Can you hear me? Is that a yes? Nod your head. Okay, great. I love that you make the point that we cannot make assumptions about individuals just on visual just assumptions in general about how we show up and all the intersections that we're bringing to the conversation. I really appreciate you highlighting that value, and then on top of that, owning all your different intersections and allowing those intersections to inform how you show up. I appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you. And Tori, I want to go to you because as a Black trans woman, I know that there are many experiences that you have experienced over the life cycle of your life as it relates to workplace or just, showing up in the world. Do you care to be a little vulnerable with us today and share a little bit about what your experience has been in the workplace and beyond?
Most definitely. So yes, I am a Black transgender woman, and I often will start off as that as part of my title. And one of the reasons I do is because I have to make sure that people understand that I represent multiply marginalized communities. You may be fine with the fact that I'm Black, but you hate trans people. You may be fine with the fact that I'm Black and trans, but you're a misogynist. And
Right.
so you have a disdain for womanhood. And so by making sure that folks understand that I represent those communities, they also understand that what I bring to the table is sharing a part of all of those perspectives in the work that I do, in the way that I approach the world, and the way that I navigate the world. Again, multiply marginalized communities. I'm also a person who holds a lot of privilege in society. I'm gainfully employed, I'm college educated, I'm a homeowner, my credit score is above 600. I hold a lot of privilege. And there's a certain amount of passing privilege I have as well. I'm a bit hoarse, as I shared with the panelists before we went live. I'm actually in New Orleans. And having a certain amount of passing privilege, and what I mean by that is not necessarily being identified as trans, certainly not out of stigma, but out of fear out of safety, simply not being targeted. And I use that word on purpose because I'm transgender, and how some idiot may think about transgender women. There's a certain amount of safety that goes with that. And I understand this privilege. And so I'm able to drink and sit in a casino and party and revel with other folks simply because they don't identify me as part of that marginalized community. And so taking an intersectional approach, understanding that in life, all of us as women, we face a lot of barriers in society, and we have to navigate a bunch of systems that were not created with us in mind. And some of them were actually created to oppose womanhood. And that's really, really interesting. When you think of banking and credit systems, they were not created with women in mind. When you think of just the fact that Sandy and each of us on here is accomplished in our own different positions, and certainly you as an author, Gabrielle and Jamie and Jesse and myself even included in that, that all of us are achieving a certain amount of success. I started in corporate before I went to nonprofit. I actually transitioned on the job in corporate during a time where it was illegal to ask a person anything about their sex or their gender. There's privilege in that also, because you kind of had to deal with it. And I was also in New York. So you had to deal with it in a way that folks now don't have to, having issues transitioning at work because of laws that make it possible for an employer to fire someone simply because they don't like you. You know, there are so many different issues that come at play. Lastly, as I close, I think about, in many of the workshops that I do, I ask people to describe themselves and use commas to describe yourselves. I'm Black, a woman, transgender. I live in the South. I'm size fluffy, which means I'm over a size 12. And I could go on and describe myself other ways. And each of those different commas represents a different intersectional identity. And all of those intersectional identities are things that society and folks in society can use to discriminate against you. And one of the things, as I pass the mic back to you, Gabrielle, that we have to remember is that as women, we're more than just women. Each of us represents something other than humanity and womanhood. And so whether we love or embrace other women for their experiences, it's important to understand that we're all facing the same barriers in society, and we're much stronger when we work together.
I love that you brought up that last point, that we're so much more than women, Tori. I think that is just a powerful statement, because I think a lot of times, to your point, that we don't I think honor and own all the different intersections that we bring to the world as women, because of those barriers that we're going to potentially face, right? So thank you for raising elevating that perspective, and hopefully being an invitation for all of us to say, look at our own self and say, okay, so what is it about me that I'm not owning, that I need to show up in order to be an example, or giving someone else permission that is looking at my life, right, on how I show up, so it can make it easier for them to show up. So thank you for bringing that up. Jesse, I want to turn to you, because I know that you have been out. You have been living authentically for a number of years. And so I'm sure that over the course of your second iteration of your life, your more authentic aspect of your life, that there have been some experiences that you've encountered as a trans woman and how you show up. So share with the group just a few minutes about an experience that you've gone through.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting hearing Jamie and Tori and the way that they've talked about these things. For me, because I didn't transition until I was 44, invisibility was never an issue for me, I'll tell you. So, you know, and I was the first trans therapist to start working at the center. I mean, I did it all at once. It was basically, I said, January 1st, 2002, I'm going to start hormones. I'm going to transition to full-time, and I'm going to go back to school and get my degree. And you know, I probably don't recommend that for everybody else to do, but it worked for me. And it was a wonderful experience, because working at the what was then, as I said, the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, I had to, you know, face my own privilege immediately, because, you know, besides white privilege, all the other privileges, and I also learned what it was to sort of sacrifice the privilege, male privilege. And dealing with such a diverse staff, and particularly in terms of the clients there, it was really just such an eye-opening experience, because I got to hear, I literally worked with hundreds of trans and LGBTQ clientele, and after a couple of years, I asked them to let me focus on the trans clients, because I felt like that would be my area of specialization. Plus, I had started lecturing on that, and I got to hear, you know, to be a witness to so many diverse lives, you know, intersectional aspects of so many, you know, different parts of life. It was just And you know, it was heartrending because you're, as a therapist, you know, working at the center, there's few people that are coming in or just kind of working on a relationship or this. There's so many levels of what they're having to deal with in the world. And you know, some days you'd sit there for, you know, 8 hours, and each hour would be more impactful than the previous one, because you'd hear stories that you just absolutely couldn't believe, because you're dealing with marginalized communities, you're dealing, you know, across all different intersections. And you know, I learned so much. I learned how to check my privilege. I learned how to understand, you know, how people dissimilar to me in so many ways, yet a lot of us had this thing in common. The other reason I asked to work specifically with trans clients was because nobody else there really had a true understanding. We assume because people are LGB that they're going to understand the experience of a trans person, but it's not really true. And it particularly wasn't that true. I mean, the first meeting I went to, actually there was a party before I started working there, and I was standing around a corner and I heard one of the gay men who was a therapist there saying to another, "Oh yeah, it looks like we have a drag queen now, you know, as a therapist." And I came around the corner and I said, "Hi, I'm Jessie, the trans woman." And I put my hand out, and you know, we all had a laugh about it, but it was kind of, you know, I would be consulted by other therapists, and they'd show me their notes, and I'd say, "Wait, is this person that you're seeing, is this somebody who's identifying as male or female?" And they would say, "Well, female." And I'd say, "Well, you're misgendering them in your notes." And you know, via HIPAA, the clients are allowed to see those notes. So if you've been working with a client for 3 or 4 months and you're misgendering them the entire time, and they've been clear about their identity, think of the impact that would have. That could undo all the therapeutic work you did. So, you know, you end up becoming sort of, I don't speak for women, I don't speak for trans women, I only speak for me. But when you're the only trans person at a facility like that, you're educating. You have to be educating. I mean, there's two things. You know, you really have to be comfortable with educating people, I suppose. And the other is you better have a sense of humor, because it's not easy out there right now. But anyway, so that's what, you know, I learned so much in such a short period of time, because I was, you know, had the privilege of being a witness to so many different people, you know, hundreds of people's experience. So it really was a fast education, and I'm so thankful for that.
I think Gabrielle.
Yeah, it's
may be
frozen maybe. Okay.
So I think I'm up next. I'm bringing
Yes,
up
you
the
are.
rear.
Jesse,
So
thank you. I love that you brought up this concept of, okay, how about that? Y'all hear me now?
yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
great. I appreciate you bringing up this topic of mental health, because if there's anything that we've learned over the last 18 months being in a pandemic, is the value of taking care of ourselves, right? And then when you add all of the layers of intersections that transgender, nonconforming, and non-binary individuals have to navigate to show up authentically in a way that we feel safe and seen, you know, there's just a lot of weight there. And to show up and bring yourself to those spaces and provide resources for that demographic. Thank you so much for the way you show up there.
Well, you know, it's also important that you mentioned the pandemic, because I think that women and LGBT people are suffering with mental health at a much higher rate than the general population, and so it's really important that is you know, focused on and dealt with.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And you also mentioned your recognition and your awareness of your own privilege, your white privilege. And so, and I know that Tori has spoken to privilege. I know Jamie has spoken to privilege. So I think privilege is the white elephant in the room that we just need to kind of call out and say, hey, you know, we need to own the privilege that we bring. And so this is a perfect segue, Sandy, to you, because I know just by knowing you and
Whoops, we lost you again.
We don't know what she was going to say. I hope it was something nice. Uh, All right. So yes, I think, gosh, I'm so inspired by Jamie and Tori.
Being around you and spending time with you, that you are very successful, it was to you. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about, what has your work experience been as a lesbian woman, especially at the levels that you've held in the organizations that you've served.
Yeah, thank you, Gabrielle. And again, I'm so inspired by, Tori and Jamie and Jesse sharing their stories. And, I own walking around as, a white woman. I have a certain socioeconomic status. I have had a successful career, and I acknowledge all of those things. I think the biggest thing that I want to mention to our audience is, owning that, but how do you use that privilege? What do you do with it, right? It's showing up in forums like this. It's being educational, as Jesse said, and owning and carrying that baton to say, part of my responsibility with this privilege is to educate. But with all of that privilege, I'll tell you, it has not been easy. I spent the first 27 years of my career in a corporate setting in the closet. I lived a dual life. I was one person at work and I was another person at home. And I was, dating someone at the time, and it really wasn't fair to them. We would go out in public and, public signs of affection. I mean, that was just, don't hold my hand, unless we were in like a bar or something, where we felt safe. But yeah, for 27 years, I did that. And I'll tell you the importance of having people in leadership who are creating cultures that are inclusive and people feel like they belong, had a huge effect on me. I came busting out of the closet at work when we had executives who were very visible and vocal about creating these inclusive cultures, for valuing people for the differences they bring, for the innovation and the business growth and the opportunities, because these are business environments that we're in. So, I mean, I came on full board, became an executive sponsor of all kinds of groups. We took the entire global organization through a culture change. We went through every line of our policies and our benefits, and included life affirming benefits, gender neutral parental benefits, removed all the exclusionary language. And so I had this journey, and it was, how did I show up? I had been in the closet, but now I had been given a voice. And I had been encouraged, and the power of leadership to really lift people up and give them voice and give them safety, and helping others in the organization is so incredibly powerful. But I will say, honestly, I have lived where I've walked down the street, I've had things thrown at me, I've had people spit at me, I've had people call me dyke, I've had people, use all kinds of terms. Jamie uses language that at one time in my generation was derogatory language, right? We talk about using the word queer. I love that we're owning that word and taking that word back in my mind, and saying, yes, this is ours. This is how we identify. And now I use the term queer more often than I ever have, because that was used as a derogatory term towards me as I was growing up. So, I've had people say, are you a guy or a girl? I've been kicked out of women's dressing rooms for, just the way I look. I had somebody say, this is a women's dressing room. Yes, I'm fully aware of that. And I am a woman. And oh my God, I get called sir to this day. If I'm just simply wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans, nobody even attempts to, understand who I am. So we've all been through it, but it's what we do with the privilege that we are bringing. And that's what excites me. And we can't forget that these intersections, as much as they are gifts, they are also things that compound some of the discrimination that we experience as human beings. It's not just women, but women, and layering on all the intersections, whether that's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, all these different things. It just compounds the discrimination. And so here we sit lifting each other up. And that's exactly, I think that might be a segue into where Gabrielle's going. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to throw it back to Gabrielle.
And Sandy, I just want to let the audience know just how much an advocate you are for the entire community, the women community, the LGBTQ plus community. I know that I have shown up many times with you, and you're the one that uses your pronouns when you introduce yourself, and I'm the one that's forgetting to use my pronouns. So I just want you to thank you for the way that you show up for so many and bring your privilege front and center to advocate for us. So I hope that our audience, if we can learn anything from the stories that you all have shared with us, is that women's experiences are not universal. Yet there's one thing that we have in common that we all experience, and that is workplace inequities. And I'm going to share my slide here for just a few minutes, and then I'll take it back down for just bear with me a second here. So just a second. So what we can see here on this slide is the disparities that predominantly straight cisgender women experience when it comes to the workplace. These statistics also show that along with our gender, our race, like we've already discussed, is another factor that impacts our workplace experience. And when the intersection of sexual orientation is added to the mix, this same McKinsey report shows that lesbian, bisexual women experience even higher levels of workplace microaggressions and the harassment that our straight sisters experience. These are daunting statistics. This next slide shows the impact that race, gender, and transgender status has on employment rates for Black and brown trans women and white trans people as compared to the average unemployment rate for all Americans in 2015. So why is it important to be aware of all these different lived experiences? Why have we spent time this morning or this afternoon allowing these voices to be raised and share their personal experiences? Well, there's a couple of reasons that I wanted to share with you. One of them is because workplace equity cannot be achieved if some women have greater access to employment than our sisters. We have to be able to advocate for one another. We have to look at workplace equity, at gender equity, as something from the perspective that there's plenty of room at the table for all of us. We have to stop looking at this conversation as a pie. And when we get to that eighth piece of the pie and it's gone, then we think there's no more pie to be had. But there is more than enough room for all of us. Another reason is because misogyny will not be defeated until all women can work free from disrespect and microaggressions and harassment. A lot of heard in personal stories from our panelists, making sure that women are respected by using the correct pronouns and not being misgendered or mispronounced. And then a third thing is because failing to address the challenges of all women undermines the very equity and equality that we are all striving to achieve. So we would be remiss if we did not give our panelists an opportunity to help us understand what we can do to advocate for all women, to provide a seat at the table for everyone in the sisterhood. So I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to share something that is an anecdotal or personal experience, or maybe a policy change that we as women need to be mindful of when we're advocating for someone whose lived experience, whose intersections are different from our own. Jamie, I wanted to start with you.
Thanks, Gabrielle. There's so many ideas that are coming to my mind right now, and so I'm quickly going through my mind trying to determine which one I want to share. I think for myself as a cisgender woman who works in a corporate space, part of owning my privilege as a cis person, to connect what we were just talking about to this, is I feel a great sense of responsibility to take an active approach in all spaces, not just women's spaces, but especially women's spaces, to make sure that all women's voices are represented. So I am a broken record saying, does this include trans people? Does this include non-binary people? Is this women's panel representing the voices of all women? Oh, it's not? Okay, maybe we need to move the date so that we can redesign the panel. And that's not just about gender representation related to womanhood, but also racial and ethnic diversity, religious diversity. It really makes a difference to hear from different kinds of people on any topic at work. And unless you're being really thoughtful to put together a panel of people who do have a different lived experience, just with the same intentionality you took, Gabrielle, to bring us together to have this conversation, it won't happen. People ask the people they know to join the panel. People ask the people they know to take the job, to apply for the job, to take that stretch assignment that needs to be done by tomorrow morning at 9. We take the easy route so often at work, especially because we're trying to go so fast and get so much done, that people don't take the time to be intentional. And so myself as a cis person, myself as a white presenting person, it's very important that I'm that broken record, I think. And that's one way that I can really take action and make room for other people. You know, it's also giving away opportunities. So, I'm really honored to be here amongst you ladies. There's a lot of times that I'm asked to do things that I say, you know what? I just had a great opportunity, but I know somebody who would love this one. And I'm able to give it to a friend at work or somebody that I know in the community that hasn't had the same opportunities that I have. So that's another way that for me, I'm able to just share some of the resources that I have by having the visibility that I have at work or in my community. And then the last thing I'll say is just about the voices of young people. So I'm on the board of an organization called Collage, which is for children and adults with LGBT parents. And so I'm working with people who are teenagers and in their 20s every single day. And I'm a 36-year-old person, so I'm still a young person. But I have to tell you what I learned from my coworkers and colleagues in Collage that are 20 or 22 or 24 is so valuable to me. And I find often, especially in the workplace, we disregard the voices of new professionals, young professionals, people who we think don't have the experience that we have. And so I challenge myself often to really listen to what someone is saying, especially when they just got there. Because when they just got there, they have a clearer vision than I could ever have. I've been drinking the Kool-Aid. I've been at the company 5 years. I've been there 10 years. So I accept the way things are in a way that they're not. And so for me, also as a person who values age diversity and just the experiences of young people, and older people too, of course, but I just want to make the point of really looking at young professionals as a wealth of knowledge, and looking at young people and teenagers as not just the voice of the future, but the voice of now. Their experiences are really real, and they're often so much more accepting and knowledgeable about what's happening in the world, in ways that I forget or have forgotten to pay attention to.
Thank you, Jamie. I really like the point that you brought up about diversifying your speaker slates, making sure that multiple voices of multiple lived experiences are showing up and given the opportunity to be heard and seen. And just the power of collaboration across multiple intersections whether it's within the women's space or just humanity in general. Thank you for bringing those points up. Tori, I want to turn to you and ask you in how you show up in the work that you do, advocacy work that you do. What kind of recommendations could you make to our audience?
So that's a big question with a little time, but I will first say do something. It is important to understand that each and every one of us has a role to play in the freedom and liberation of all of our people and all womanhood. And so do something. If, there were folks, I will make a quick analogy to the modern civil rights movement. There were folks while Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King were out, and Bayard Rustin and many other people were out marching in streets and on Washington. There were also folks who were frying chicken because people needed to eat. There were people from place to place. There were folks who were providing all kinds of other resources, who were knitting sweaters, believe it or not. And so whatever it is that you do, if you're great at knitting a sweater, then knit sweaters, sell them and donate the proceeds to local organizations, which I think could really, really be impactful, to organizations in your area. If you're a songwriter, Jesse, if you are a songwriter or producer, then create music or create art that represents where we are and where we need to go. So whatever it is that you do something, and do it with gusto.
Tori, I really resonate with that, because I feel like one of all of our superpowers is our visibility. And unless we show up, unless we bring our whole self to however we're showing up, or we're not giving others permission to do the same. And, show up, just do something. That's fabulous recommendation. Thank you for sharing that. Jesse, how about you?
Well, yeah, first of all, as a songwriter, that has become the thing. I mean, I wrote from a different perspective before I transitioned, but nonetheless, I go back and look at some of those songs now, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I was saying. That it sort of came out of the unconscious, which is a really interesting thing. But I'd like to speak to the mental health aspect of all of this, because it's my area of expertise besides music. And I feel like what Colors is doing and what Antioch is doing, providing services to a really diverse group of young people, is essential, because a lot of people in different socioeconomic backgrounds don't have access to therapy, and therapy is so incredibly helpful. I saw this at the center. I see it at Colors. Colors is amazing because, if I'm not mistaken, the majority of the clients there currently are trans men or trans women or non-binary. But it's LGBTQ plus and all that. So I think that those services have to be available in areas that normally don't get those services. Be available to all people. And it's a common problem across all of capitalistic society, in the sense that access is really, really essential. And so for me, being on the board is such an honor and a privilege, because we can make sure that that this gets out to everybody. To get everybody in the neighborhood is not just for white people, it's not just for wealthy people, it's not just for cisgender people. I mean, I think so I think that in this case, a private company, a private school like Antioch, the fact, I've said to them often, and my feeling is that you should just finance this, you should support this, because you can afford to. USC, you can afford to. UCLA, I'm just talking about in terms of Los Angeles, but everywhere that we need those allies. We need the people who are, because the majority of the people in the institutes are going to be cisgender, probably white, all that. They need to make those services available to all, because you know what, they can afford to do it, and it's the right thing to do. So for me, if this could spread outwards, to other schools, to other across the board, to any sort of mental health services, any private companies, there are nonprofits, but that's not enough. I mean, it needs to be something that's incorporated. The center, the LGBT center, has a sliding scale so that you only pay what you can afford to pay. But the idea of having those free services and somebody subsidizing that, I think that's something to work towards, because mental health is the #1 issue as to, in your life, as to whether you're going to be successful and be able to go where you want to in the world. And I think I can't say enough about it, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to move on.
Jamie, thank you for sharing the point about us being able to needing to recognize barriers in order kind of what we're talking about here today. I sit on a number of boards locally and nationally, and making sure that you have the right voices in the room, the right voices at the table, requires you to get creative sometime, right? And part of that creation is part of being created is recognizing the barriers and finding ways through, around, and over those barriers so that the right voices are included in the conversation. So thank you for raising. I want you to kind of finish up today and let us kind of know what have you seen in the work that you do and how you show up. What can we do to advocate for folks to have a seat at the table?
Yeah, and gosh, all important points coming from Tori and Jamie and Jesse. But from a corporate perspective, in my mind, it's bringing other women along and lifting other women up. We talk about mentoring and we talk about sponsorship, and I ask women often to lean really heavily into the sponsorship. Mentoring is amazing, and we learn from each other in mentoring relationships. But sponsoring is where you're being a champion, you're being an advocate for another woman or a group of women, that you're actually got their back and you're sitting in and you're giving them voice when they don't have a voice, and allowing them to spread their wings. So being a sponsor, being a champion is where I often encourage folks to go. The other side of this is really important, is knowing when to be quiet. We talk about our privilege a lot. I love to talk. I think Gabrielle knows this very well, and anybody else, probably this whole panel now, knows that I love to talk. That's why I do what I do. I'm an activist and an advocate and an ally. But knowing, and this has worked for me, and I think it's worked for a lot of folks, especially if you're an activist, is knowing when to be quiet and create space for other voices. You can give voice, but you can also create space for voice. And so that is an area where I continue to do my work and try to see the world through other people's eyes. Gabrielle's friendship has meant a lot to me, because I get to see the world through a different perspective and another woman's eyes that I don't get to see. And she gets to see through my eyes and what I experience in life, and just walking around as we are and who we are, and having the ability to see, quiet, listen, and lift each other up. So that's my advice for the team, is really leaning into the sponsorship and seeing through somebody else's eyes and knowing when to be quiet.
Sandy, and if I could just, give you some accolades here for a moment, because you have done just that, what you've shared with me and so many others. You have brought us along. You have provided access to spaces that we would not otherwise have access to. You have learned, and I feel like sometimes I spend more time convincing you to say something as opposed to listening and being quiet. But it's like you have learned that beautiful balance of speaking up and advocating for, and then giving the platform to other folks. And I just feel like that is a very selfless act of compassion and love for those folks around you who, you want to elevate. So thank you for being so wonderful at that, and even teaching me how to do that as I continue to show up in the spaces that I show up, raising those voices that need to be raised. So thank you for that. I'm going to go a little off script and ask our panelists one final question. Each of you have like 60 seconds, okay, for this. And that is, if there's one thing you want to leave our audience today, What is the one thing you want them to hear? So anybody want to jump in there? We don't have to go in any particular order. Sandy.
I'll jump in. Remember, all women who identify as women are women. We can't go this alone, and we need each other. So no matter how we identify, how we present, who we sleep with, we are women and we need each other. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Sandy. Tori.
Great. I put it in the chat, but it's also important to understand that ally is both a noun and also a verb. It's not just who you are, but it's also what you do.
I love that. Do you want to unpack that a little further, Tori, or
Well, you know what, I love to, but in the interest of time, we will allow folks to dissect it on their own.
okay, fair enough.
I love
Jamie?
that,
Time for me to go and
Tori.
drink some more.
Yeah, exactly. Jamie, how about you?
I'll say I'd like to leave the attendees with the reminder that there's enough to go around. There's enough for you to have the success that you have, the income that you need to survive and to thrive, and also to share your success, to share your financial resources, to share your career networks, your personal networks, your community networks with other people. There's enough for you and enough for other people. And I think we all have a responsibility to share what we achieve.
I love that. Perfect segue into where we're going next. Jesse, how about you?
Well, I just wanted to really quickly touch on something that Sandy said about being questioned about being in the women's room. I think for trans women, this is such an important point because everybody's assuming it's just about being trans, but it's not. It's about anybody that is, non-traditional or in their appearance. And I think that the takeaway should be that we are all women, and it doesn't matter how we present, and all the arguments against it were the same arguments that were used in terms of racial discrimination. They were the same arguments that were used against LGBT people, and they will be the same arguments that is now going against non-binary people. And I think you have to realize that affects all of us. It affects all women. It doesn't just affect trans women. And I also want to say the exact same for trans men, because the communities that attack us also want to take their agency away from saying, well, I was assigned female at birth, but I am male, and they want to take that agency. So if they're being so concerned about what they see as women, how do they explain that? And I think if anybody can just get that takeaway, I think that then things can change. Otherwise, they won't.
Thank you for that, Jesse. So I've been monitoring the chat box since we've been having some conversation, and I'm not seeing any questions. So I wanted to stop here for just a few moments. If anyone has any questions that you would like to bring forth for the panelists, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. We've got folks monitoring that. So we want to stop here for just a moment. So it looks like we've got a question here. And I think, Tori, that you may have already addressed it, or someone here, but I'm going to read it out loud. And if you all can respond, is there a trans union working for the rights of working for the rights for trans women? Does anyone know about an organization that does that? I know that someone suggested Trans Can Work in LA. They advocate for equitable trans employment for trans women and TGNC, the entire TGNC MB community. So that is one organization. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'll jump in.
Tori?
Tori put in the chat also the ACLU has great resources, the American Civil Liberties Union. So that's a great place. And I'll add to that also GLAD, which is the GLBTQ Advocates and Defenders. And they're a New England based organization that does fierce advocacy and legal work for trans folks.
And that's 1A, not 2As, right, Jamie?
Yes, 1A, not 2As. I'll put it in the chat.
And I would
Thank you,
be
Jan.
if I didn't mention the organization where I work, which is the Human Rights Campaign, which has
Absolutely.
a very long history of advocating for all folks, particularly LGBTQ folks, with a renewed interest in advocating for trans folks and non-binary people.
My ex-employer is also the LGBT Center. I think, you know, they have a legal program there, a work program for trans people. And so I think that's another organization that's doing something about it. And I think they're the largest organization in
Yeah, and I
the
would
world,
suggest
I think.
Lambda Legal is another resource to check out for sure.
Right. So a lot of these organizations are national organizations, they're local organizations. So I think the one thing that we would encourage our audience to do, if you're looking for the Google, you know, trans support, trans resources, and you will be amazed at how much information populates in your search. So we want to encourage you to do that.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
We have another question here from Marvin. I'll let y'all read the question. Do y'all see the question in the chat box? Anybody want to respond to this? From Marvin.
I think it's, you know, the need or the feeling the need to live two different lives that I was talking about. He was asking the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I did that.
Anybody?
I didn't transition until I was 44. So I had to, you know, from the time I was a teenager, I had a separate life. And you know, in psychology, there's a theory sort of based on Freud, but it's Melanie Klein who came up with the theory of splitting. So it's, you know, your identity splits
And
off.
Susanna
There's
Binama.
the public identity and there's the private identity. And, you know, I did that for a large part of my life until it became unbearable. And you know, I mean, transitioning when I was a teenager in 1973 would not have been an easy, you know, course of action to take. So you know, you sort of get used to that, but I think what I believe I take away from what Sandy was saying is it's hard. It's really hard because you're presenting one identity to most of the people who are close to you, you know. And when I finally made the decision to transition, for example, I was married. And it was, you know, a heartbreaking experience to go through because I knew that it wouldn't be something where my then wife was going to easily adapt to that. So we had to really work through a lot of stuff, and we ended up, you know, getting divorced. Some couples stay together, and it's an amazing thing to see. I'm now married to another trans woman, which is probably the last thing in the world I thought would happen, but I'm so glad that it did happen. We've been together for almost 20 years now. So. You know, so once those two lives come together, things seem to get a whole lot better for the
Pretty
most part.
amazing, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
an amazing journey.
Strange how that works.
Anybody else want to respond to that? Tori, are you?
Yes, happy to. I'm actually looking for a quote to put in chat from Audre Lorde, which says, "We don't live single issue lives." Because, you know, and it's true that there are very few people, if any, who only have race to deal with. There's also sexuality and gender. And for some of us, those are transitioning, with the play on words, issues there. So yeah, so there's that.
You know, it's interesting, you know, Jesse, you mentioned relationships and you know, the toll it takes on relationships. And a lot of relationships, unfortunately, don't survive that. I will say, mine did. That woman that I was dating all those years ago is my wife. We've been together over 30 years and married more than 10. So she's still around. She put up with me through all of that and stuck around. And, you know, now we walk down the street holding hands. So it's awesome.
And that is fabulous, Sandy. I will tell you one thing that I've learned in my journey of authenticity is that, it's not just living two separate lives. It's being honest and vulnerable and transparent with who you know yourself to be. And I feel like as human beings, as women, as human beings, we all have an aspects of authenticity that are waiting to come forth in us. So I guess the question that I would turn back to all the audience members is what is it like for you to live inauthentic? If you know something that is waiting to come forth in you, what is it like for you to struggle with showing up vulnerably and transparently? So it's no different for a trans individual to embrace our aspect of our truth as it relates to our gender identity. And that's just one aspect of our authenticity when we show up. So I know we're over time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for this conversation. And in closing, I wanted to share something with you. When I began my journey to womanhood 11 years ago, a good friend of mine told me about a book that speaks so beautifully to the value of advocating for all women. In the book, A Woman's Worth by Marianne Williamson, she shares how Oprah championed her work and actually helped launch her career. In her book, she writes, "We must learn from the lessons of women who share their bounty of opportunity and influence and power and goodwill. There is a mountaintop with enough room for all of us. None of us will get there and stay there unless all of us get there and stay there. If women succeed only in isolated cases, the professional world will continue to be unsure ground for women in general. We must take the communion of women very seriously and do all that we can do to support other women in reaching for the stars. There cannot be too many glorious women. There cannot be too much success." I wanted to thank my panelists for giving your time and sharing your personal stories so honestly and vulnerably with us today. Your continued visibility matters for the health and well-being for all of us. So thank you all for showing up. This is a passion of love, a work, a labor of love by Amy and Nancy. They have poured their heart into this. So please take advantage of all the different resources that are available. And remember that we are stronger together when we include all women in the sisterhood. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.